of the okay, so I think we're live streaming now. Welcome everyone who's watching us either on YouTube or through Zoom. We're with you again with a wonderful seminar, and hopefully today we're gonna get the brain cogs moving again and try to make a difference in terms of human rights and how we see it. And we have a special guest today. So our seminar has a different layout this time. Ms. Tahira Nasiri. She's a avid advocate for women's rights, Hazara rights, and she's here today to give us a speech and a presentation about the horrible atrocities that the Hazara people are facing, and the kind of things that we could do maybe to ease their suffering and get the word out and make sure that everyone is aware of the violations of human rights as the whole program is. And I also want to start off by just saying thank you to the Law Foundation of Ontario for funding this seminar and making it possible. And then we will have our keynote speaker, founder of the Center for Law and Democracy, Mr. Toby Mendel, who will go into the main topic of our seminar today, which is identifying and pursuing human rights violations, whether it be through courts or whether it be through just advocacy on its own, and how to identify it in the first place. We touched on that a little bit last time. So not everything grew to the purport. Obviously, like every kind of violation is a bad instance, but not all of them are directly a human rights violation. Some could just be a slur or something. So identifying it as well is also a challenge, and also making it recognizable could be a challenge. And so Mr. Mendel will give us his insights into that. And so without further ado, I'd like to leave the floor to Ms. Nasiri, and she will start off with our presentation on the human rights violations being done to the Hazara people and her advocacy for women's rights.
Hello and good afternoon. It is truly an honor to be here today, and thanks for giving me the chance. I'm trying to continue concisely about the importance and power of education and awareness for marginalized communities, especially for Hazara communities who for too long have been left behind, ignored, and silenced. Also, I would like to touch on how they struggle. They struggle for their right to deal with difficulties, and why has the documentation of crimes against the Hazara people faced obstacles. So let me start my speech with that. Education is not just about books, schools, or degrees. It is about freedom, dignity, and empowerment. Education means survival. Education means hope. It gives people the ability to question injustice, to stand up for their rights, and to shape their own future. For the Hazara people who have faced centuries of discrimination, violence, and exclusion, education has always been a light in the darkness. It gives them a voice when the prejudice tries to silence them. It gives them strained when everything around them feels uncertain. When people are educated, they begin to understand their value. That they are equal, that they have rights, and that they are observed to live with dignity. Awareness helps them realize that their pain and struggle are not invisible, that injustice can be challenged, and that change is possible. But the path to awareness and education is never easy. For many marginalized communities, simply wanting education is an act of courage. Schools are destroyed, teachers are threatened, students, especially girls, face danger just for trying to learn. Yet they continue. Think just about that for a moment. Young people walking miles to attend secret classes. Mothers teaching their children in their homes when the schools are closed. Activists risking their lives to speak the truth. This is the power of awareness. This is the power of education. So, when marginalized communities stand up for their rights, they often face resistance and fear. They are told to stay silent, to accept inequality as normal, but they refuse. They speak, they march, and they write. They educate because they know silence only strengthens oppression. The Hazara people are a shining example of resilience and courage. Despite years of suffering, they continue to fight for education, for justice, and for peace. There were days when the schools and universities of the Hazara people were turned into ruins, and the sound of explosion replaced the voice of students who once dreamed of a brighter future. Yet, even in the face of death and darkness, the Hazara people did not surrender. They rose from pain and loss, stronger and wiser, proving that no power can silence their love for knowledge or their hope for a better tomorrow. The Hazara stories teach us something important, that true power does not come from weapons or wealth. It comes from knowledge, from unity, and from hope. Each educated person becomes a candle that lights another. Awareness spreads like fire, a fire that burns away ignorance and hatred. That's why education matters so deeply. It doesn't just change one life, it changes generations. But change cannot happen in isolation. It needs all of us to listen, to speak out, to support those whose voices are often ignored and silenced. We must raise awareness, share their stories, and stand beside them, not as observers, but as allies in their struggle for justice and equality. Because when one community rises, we all rise. When one voice is heard, we all grow stronger. As I mentioned about the challenges, discrimination, and injustice which Hazara community faced in the past until the present, as a marginalized community in Afghanistan, and how they fought for education and their rights. Unfortunately, this discrimination and violence against the Hazara have not been properly documented or considered in any court, mainly due to the lack of political representation with judicial systems. And the Taliban's control over Afghanistan, which prevents independent investigations. In current situation, limited international attention destroyed evidence, and fear of retaliation have also hindered the documentation. Although some human rights organizations have reported these crimes, the absence of strong global pressure and legal mechanisms has left the Hazara community suffering largely unrecognized in international courts. So, ultimately, it is my glad to address my experience as a Hazara women activist and a human rights defender, which education and awareness in my shield against discrimination, ignorance, and harassment. It gives me the courage to continue. Growing up as a Hazara girls in Afghanistan, I witnessed injustice and inequality. I saw how girls were denied education, and how people were silenced because of their beliefs and ethnicity. But I also learned that that education is the strongest weapon against oppression. It is light that no darkness can destroy. I speak up for human rights, minorities, and equality, especially when the Taliban took over Afghanistan and denied women and minorities access to basic rights, education, and I choose to raise my voice by standing in the streets to protest and speaking through the media and defying their oppressive rules. Come with fear and threats. I am still keep continuing this way, and will continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Definitely an eye-opener. It's very interesting you say that, especially with your own experience. The fact that it's when you talk about it, it's more of a been there, done that, seen it. This is what we gotta do, kind of perspective. So it's not like we have to discover America twice from your experience, we can literally see that if someone is educated, they're more likely to pick themselves out of a bad situation rather than if they're not, especially for minorities that are especially targeted specifically, whether it be a government or another organization that tries to keep them down. The best thing to do is kind of help them educate and help them in terms of finding their own voice, basically. Thank you so much. Well, for me at least personally, I'll definitely be on the lookout for the plights of the Hazara people. I don't know for any of our other listeners, but I guess my ignorance was that I knew about the Hazara people and the current situation in Afghanistan, but I wasn't as aware as I am now after your speech. So from now on, I'll definitely be on the lookout for it and try to be more vigilant in terms of catching that. And it's also very good. I don't know if we have any questions for you. I can't see the YouTube comments, but just for the technical side of things, if we have any questions, if not, we will move on. So I'm guessing we don't have any questions. Again, on behalf of the Northern Justice Watch, I want to thank you for your speech today and your presentation. And thank you so much. And again, like it was an honor to have you. And hopefully we'll do more of these collaborations in the future and get the word out. So it's also a great leeway into our topic for our keynote speaker today, which is identifying and reporting human rights violations. Documenting and reporting human rights violations. So from all of our panels, you all know Mr. Toby Mendel by now, and he will talk about the I guess tactics, or well, I'll leave that to him. I don't know exactly how he'll approach it. I did get a sneak peek into his slides before you, so that's the advantage of being a moderator. But now we'll all get to experience it together. So the topic again is again, sorry for my B12 deficiency, documenting and reporting human rights violations. I'll leave the floor to Mr. Toby Mendel, and he'll have a presentation for us on that.
Thank you so much. And let me also thank Ms. Nassiri. I mean, the things that are going on in Afghanistan today are truly terrible, and the discrimination against women and the Hazaras and other minorities. It's nothing short of a tragedy. So it's certainly very interesting and good to hear about that. And let me apologize in advance. I have a little bit of a cold, unfortunately. So I will be stopping and drinking a little bit of tea to keep my throat wet and keep my voice there. So bear with me on that. I'm just going to share my slides. So can you see that? You can see that now?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay. So, and the style of the presentation, I'll talk for sort of 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have a little break, or we might have a break in the middle, and then I'll have a little discussion with Kazim, and then there'll be a chance for Q&A from the audience. So please, keep thinking about your questions as we go along. So, I mean, the issue that I'm going to talk about is really a vast area. I mean, Ms. Nassiri talked about one type of human rights abuse, which is discrimination. But I mean, there's an enormous range of possible human rights issues that you might want to document and report on. And there are, a lot of actors working in this area, and different types of actors, including official and civil society actors. And there's a lot of official, quasi-official, and non-official means of reporting. So, I mean, there's a lot of substance in this. So I'm going to be taking a fairly broad brush approach. I'm going to try to give an overview of the whole scene. And then, of course, if there are issues that you want to probe down more deeply into, just ask me. I mean, as I'm going along, don't worry. I'm very happy to be interrupted by a question or a comment. And if there are issues that you feel that I didn't address in my presentation, of course, just mention them, and if I, to the extent that I can, I'll deal with them. So, I have a presentation, but please, feel free to, interact with me during the presentation.
Sounds good. I'll jump right in.
Yeah, please, and anyone else as well. So I'm going to really cover four main areas. Firstly, what are the sources of human rights? Where do human rights come from? What are the key types of human rights? So what's an overview of this, the whole scope of human rights? Which are the key actors that are involved in documenting and reporting on human rights? Who are the different players? And I'm going to focus a little bit on Canada because I think that's the purpose of this, is to give a view of Canada, but it's similar in other democracies. Of course, some countries aren't democracies like Afghanistan, so the system for reporting won't be as developed there. So it would be a little different from country to country. And then the last bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about the options for civil society organizations. So I'm assuming that quite a few of you are with civil society organizations. Obviously, Northern Justice Watch is a civil society organization. My own organization, the Center for Law and Democracy, is also a civil society organization. So that little bit of a focus on that. And I should mention that in addition to being the executive director of the Center for Law and Democracy, I'm also on the advisory board of Northern Justice Watch, so I have a kind of a connection with them. So essentially, we can talk about two different levels of guarantees of human rights: national, so in any country, and also international. And the international system, obviously, very, very important. Ms. Nassiri, for example, was talking about how there hasn't been enough justice for Hazaras, and I think she was mostly talking about the international system and how it hasn't perhaps engaged enough and done enough to protect that group of people. So we'll be looking at both of them. And there's in terms of the guarantee of human rights, the legal guarantees, there's a hierarchy in both of these systems. So if we look at the national level, most countries have a constitutional Bill of Rights. So in Canada, we have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is, sets out the human rights that are guaranteed by our Constitution. The Constitution in any country is at the very top of the hierarchy. It's the most, the highest level of legal guarantee. Some of you may be newcomers to Canada, and you may not realize this, but our Charter of Rights and Freedoms was only adopted in 1982. So before 1982, Canada did not have a constitutional guarantee for human rights. It's fairly recent. We did have a Bill of Rights before that, but that was just an ordinary law, so not a constitutional guarantee. And if you find it surprising that Canada didn't have a guarantee before 1982, still today, countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand all still don't have any constitutional guarantees for human rights. So that, those countries, unlike Canada, unlike most countries, if some of you are, have arrived in Canada, almost all of your countries will have constitutional guarantees of human rights. And of course, the rest of the Commonwealth. So it's interesting that within the Commonwealth, basically Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom didn't have constitutional guarantees, but everybody else pretty much did. So the British, when they decolonized, left constitutional guarantees in all of those other countries, but not in our country, and we brought ours in 1982. So I think that's sort of, I don't know if people are surprised by that, but then if we look at the Charter guarantees, and this is true of any constitutional guarantee, they're absolutely important, but they're also very, very brief. For example, if we think about the guarantee of freedom of expression, what our Charter says in section 2, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms, and there's a list of them. And B, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. So that's it. That's all the Constitution of Canada says about freedom of expression. It doesn't say anything about defamation law, about broadcasting, about print media. It doesn't say anything about any of those things. So it's really through interpretation by the courts that the substance of this guarantee is elaborated. From those words, those few words that I have on the screen, you couldn't say what the guarantee means. It's there, but what does it mean? It's through interpretation by the courts. So, and I would say that, this is not the topic of this conversation, but I think that the civil society and other actors like academics, for example, have an important contribution to make in the elaboration of those rights. And my organization actually does quite a bit of work on that, and we can talk about that later if you want, because by setting out what we think the rights should guarantee, courts will take that into account when cases come up. So it's important to, that the elaboration by courts is strong, and we all can contribute to that. So underneath the Charter, we have the ordinary laws. So, for example, we have the Canadian Human Rights Act. So even in its title, it says that it's a human rights law. The Criminal Code, and I'll come back to that. People may think it's interesting that I'm putting the Criminal Code up there as a human rights law, but it certainly is. And we also, in the Canadian system, we have the common law. So that's like the judge-made law. For example, defamation law, contempt of court. Those are all a part of our legal system, and they're made by judges. Obviously, ordinary laws can be amended anytime by Parliament. It's much more difficult to amend the Constitution. And also, ordinary laws have to be in line with the Constitution. So if the courts decide that a law is not consistent with the Constitution, in Canada, for example, they will strike down that law, and that law will no longer be a law, even though Parliament passed it. But basically, the courts will say, no, it's not consistent with the Constitution. So the Constitution is the overriding one. And the laws, of course, are also subject to interpretation by the courts. And there may also be, well, not there may be, there are also administrative bodies in democracies that are empowered to interpret and apply different laws. So, for example, we have the Canadian Human Rights Commission that's under the Canadian Human Rights Act, which interprets that piece of legislation. We have the Information Commissioner, which interprets the Access to Information law, the Privacy Commissioner, which who deals with privacy issues. So there's a number of human rights commissions that interpret and apply the laws. And they have different sorts of powers, to provide remedies and to sanction people who abuse human rights and take different actions like that. So there's a whole system underneath the laws for applying them. Okay, moving now to the international system. And we have two main sources of law internationally. And the first and certainly the most important are treaties. So treaties are written documents, a little bit like laws, which states individually ratify. So it's up to a state to decide whether or not to ratify a treaty. Some of the human rights treaties are very, very widely ratified. Almost all countries, but not all countries, have ratified them. And some are less widely ratified. And there's a lot of treaties, and we'll come back to that in a second. There's also customary international law, and this is a much less well-known area of law or source of law. Customary international law are rules that states treat as binding as between themselves. So they're not written down. They're not like signed document like a treaty, but they are practices that evolve into customary international law because all of the states accept them as being binding on themselves. And so, for example, the law of the sea, the idea that there's a certain area of exclusive economic zone, then there's territorial waters up to 200 miles, and then after that is the open sea, and anyone can travel on the open sea, and you can't interfere with traffic and things like that. There's a huge set of rules about the law of the sea. Now there's a treaty on the law of the sea that was adopted also in 1982. Before that, though, all of those rules about the sea, they were just customary international law. Nothing written down, but still it was a very established, very developed body of law, and everybody respected it. So it's law, even though it's not written down and not kind of like the law that we think about. And customary international law is very important in the area of human rights for those countries which have not ratified the treaties. So if you ratify the treaty, then normally we're going to look to the treaty because it sets out clearly in black and white, what rules are binding. But for countries that haven't ratified the treaties, we need to look to customary international law because they still have human rights obligations. Those obligations just arise from customary international law. So, as in the national level, the guarantees in international law are fairly brief. So, the guarantee of freedom of expression, to use the same example, in international law is found in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a treaty which, by the way, has been ratified by 173 countries. So a lot of countries, but still 20 countries that didn't ratify it. And it sets out in one paragraph the guarantee of freedom of expression. So again, it's very important for that to be elaborated. There are some courts, some human rights courts in the international system. For example, there are regional human rights courts in Europe, in Africa, and in the Americas. So those three regions of the world. But Asia, for example, there's no human rights court there. There is the UN Human Rights Committee, which is the body that's responsible for the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But basically, the ability of international courts to elaborate on human rights is a lot more limited than at the national level, because at the national level, we have everything can ultimately be decided by the courts. But in the international level, and again, Nassiri mentioned that there's no cases against Afghanistan in the international system, even though there should be, because there are human rights abuses going on there. That's not like at the national level. At the national level, there will always be cases. So what we find at the international level, in the absence of courts, is a lot of less formal, but still very important and still very authoritative not binding, but sources of elaborating these guarantees, what we call soft law. For example, most of the human rights treaties have committees under them. So I mentioned the Human Rights Committee under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and they interpret and apply the guarantees. So, they're not courts, but they do elaborate on what the guarantees mean. There is at the Human Rights Council, the peak human rights body in the UN, the Universal Periodic Review, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about that later. So that's a process, it's Universal Periodic Review, so every country is reviewed through that process around every 4 or 5 years. And so again, that gives a opportunity to elaborate on human rights. There are declarations. For example, the General Assembly has adopted a lot of declarations on human rights. UNESCO, for example, is responsible for freedom of expression, so it has adopted declarations on freedom of expression issues. There are also a whole system of special rapporteurs on freedom of expression. So I'm not sure how many there are right now, but there's maybe 38 or something like that. They also make statements. So there's a lot of ways to elaborate on international human rights guarantees. Not so much through the courts, although that does happen, but in other ways as well. Okay, just a few words on the interaction between the international and the national legal systems. So they're separate systems of law with separate, treaties and constitutions and so forth. So different sets of guarantees for human rights. And there are basically two main approaches around the world to international law. Half of the world, roughly half of the world, are what we would call monist in nature. Monist meaning one system. So those countries consider international law to be part of the national legal system. And usually you'll find that the constitution of those countries will talk about international law and it will describe the status of international law. And often international law, there's the constitution at the top, then international law is next, and then the national laws are beneath that. So technically in those countries, and that's a lot of countries in the world, if international law is inconsistent with the national law, then international law is the one that should be followed. In practice, courts in most countries don't apply it like that. So it's not as effective as it should be, but that's an interesting fact for many, many countries. In most of the common law countries, like Canada, take a dualist approach. International law is not part of the national legal system. It's only where the national legal system incorporates international law, so where a national law incorporates international law, that it becomes part of the national legal system. And that can be done, in a wide variety of different ways. For example, here in Canada, we have a law. It's called the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And basically, it says that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, so that's a General Assembly, UN General Assembly declaration, not a treaty, just a declaration, but it says that Canada will take all measures necessary to ensure that the laws of Canada are consistent with the declaration. So our country has committed to bringing our own laws into line with that declaration. So kind of a way of incorporating it. So that's sort of the international and national legal systems running in parallel in some countries and running together in other countries.
Was this a recent change?
No. Do you mean this act or the system?
The act for Canada?
Yes. That act was adopted. I'd have to look up exactly when it was adopted.
No, because I do remember like the whole news about it when it did come out. So, but it's definitely good to see at least that it evolves alongside society. So nothing is stagnant. That's always good to see.
Absolutely. No, it's actually a hugely important development.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that there's been some litigation, some case law on this, but I think there's scope for a lot more. So Indigenous groups can say, or anyone actually, but particularly Indigenous groups may say, this law, this treaty that, for example, that the government signed a treaty with Indigenous people, but it's not a fair treaty because it was adopted 100 years ago when the power imbalance was unfair. They can say, this is not in line with the UNDRIP, it's called, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. It's not in line with UNDRIP. You have to amend it and things. I mean, there's it's a very significant law, actually.
Yeah.
So, and of course, we're seeing a lot of changes in that area in terms of the government's relationship with Indigenous peoples and whatever. There's a lot of discussions and negotiations and litigation, disagreements and fights in court about that whole area. So very active area in Canada at the moment. I just do want to point out that, I mean, human rights are not the same as international humanitarian law. So international humanitarian law is how you should treat people in the context of armed conflict, especially whether it's international or national, internal armed conflict. So that's a very important body of law. So, you have to feed people and treat prisoners properly and all that kind of stuff. That's a different area of law, though, than human rights. And then there's another area of law, which is, again, different, international criminal law. And the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and people can be charged, individuals can be charged as criminals under that. Again, that's a different area of law. That's criminal law, whereas human rights law is about the obligations of states. Criminal law is about the behavior that's unacceptable for for individuals to engage in. Obviously, important overlap between these three areas of law. But just to mention that they are all technically different, and if people have questions about that, then we can come back to that. Okay, moving on now to look at sort of what are human rights, I mean, the scope of human rights for each country does vary because everyone's constitution is different. So the rights that are guaranteed, I mean, there's a lot of overlap. Every country has a guarantee of freedom of expression. I don't think there's any country which doesn't guarantee that right, for example. But there are differences as well. So it depends on the constitution, and it also depends on which of the international treaties the country has ratified. Not all of them, not every country has ratified all of the treaties by any means. So it depends which. So, for example, in the case of Canada, we have ratified 13 of the 18 treaties that the United Nations, human rights treaties that the United Nations lists as being the most important. So there are 5 of them that we haven't ratified, including optional protocols. So there's often the main treaty, and then underneath it, there may be an optional protocol setting out some additional rules. So the 18 includes both the main treaties and the optional protocols, and Canada has ratified 13 of those 18. And as I mentioned, customary international law applies to everyone, so it doesn't matter what you've ratified; those are always binding. And if we look at the rights that are guaranteed under the Canadian Charter, and the Charter obviously is online. You can go and read it if you want. I would encourage people to read it. It's not that long. It's interesting to see what actually are the rights that are guaranteed in it. It basically focuses on civil and political rights. One set of rights which are guaranteed, and most constitutions, not all, but most constitutions, especially in Western countries, focus on civil and political rights. And I would say that although some activists have tried to expand that into, for example, health or education, other rights areas, courts have been quite reluctant to go there. So the courts are comfortable in Canada with civil and political rights, and they basically, keep it there. It's very different under international law. Under international law, we have what's called the International Bill of Rights, which is 3 documents. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a General Assembly declaration, so not a treaty, just a declaration, but it's a very, very important declaration, which is, got the highest status of a UN declaration, I would say. And then underneath it, 2 different treaties that form the Bill of Rights: the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which I've already mentioned, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Economic, social, and cultural rights. So, for example, that treaty talks about the right to health, the right to education, the right to a job, social and cultural rights that are quite different. None of those rights are guaranteed in the Canadian Constitution. And so a very different package. So international law is much wider in the scope of rights that it guarantees. So just to give people a sense, it's not the purpose to get deeply into the scope of human rights here, but if we look at the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, the key things that we find there are the different freedoms: freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of movement. So those are the package of freedoms. The right to vote and stand for elections, so the basic democratic rights. The right to life, liberty, and security of the person. A long list of criminal due process rights. So, for example, that you're presumed innocent until proven guilty, rights about fair trial, about the independence of the judiciary, things like that, very, very important. And when I mentioned the criminal code earlier as a human rights document, the criminal code in Canada, the criminal code is where the criminal procedures are found, and those procedures have to be in line with these constitutional guarantees. So they, guarantee and protect those kinds of rights. The right to equality, which is, and including equality before and under the law, and gender equality and equality for all different groups and types of people in Canada. Official languages, so the 2 official languages, and a bunch of rules about minority language. Education, which has been historically established in Canada. And then finally, mention the rights of Aboriginal peoples. So we talked earlier about UNDRIP. Rights of Aboriginal peoples are also recognized in the Charter. Those are the main guarantees that are found in the Charter, of course, subject to interpretation by the courts. Any question on that, Kazim? Does that seem Is that surprising to you? Are there things that you thought might be there that aren't there, for example? Or
So having a little bit of a legal background as a paralegal, it's not surprising. I did just the one aspect of it is you mentioned how international law tries to guarantee a lot more under the scope of human rights, like a guarantee of a job, guarantee of health and stuff like that. But um, to me, it always seems like international law tries to capture a utopia, and then countries try to catch up in terms of their economic and national security agendas and everything. But it did kind of bring up a question in my mind, whereas like uh, obviously we talked about international law in a very good sense of leading the way, but especially nowadays with what we see around the world, how effective do you really see international law, and how much do actual sovereign states really take heed of it?
yeah, I mean that's a very interesting question. I mean, I would mention Canada has ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So even though our own constitution doesn't guarantee those rights, we're still bound under international law to respect them. And I mean, even though we don't guarantee them in our constitution, Canada does provide education for everybody. It does provide health care, and so I mean, Canada is compliant, does actually meet most of those human rights. Of course, not perfectly, and there's always,
There's always something.
room for further improvement
Yeah.
and cases and disputes and whatever. But I mean, I think that this is going to sound like a funny answer, perhaps, to your question, but for countries which are not democratic and don't care about human rights, like, for example, Afghanistan at the moment, under the Taliban, international law is not very effective.
Mhm.
For the rogue states, if I can put it that way, there are a lot of systems under international law. There's the Human Rights Committee to apply the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It has mechanisms, it has systems, it has there's the UPR, which I talked about, and I'll talk a little bit more about. But none of that is binding and forceful. So
Mhm.
in the national level, if you get an order from the court, then there are forceful authorities to enforce that. You can't ignore a court order because ultimately the police are going to come to your house.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately that's the way that the court will convict you for not obeying its, that's contempt of court. Now you're into a criminal if you don't obey the rules of courts. There's no such thing as that in the international legal system.
Yeah.
There's no international police force. So if the Taliban, for example, discriminate against women, which as Nassiri, and discriminate against Hazaras, as Nassiri pointed out to us, there's not a lot that the international community can really do. I mean, they can sanction the country, they can isolate it, but there's no police force that can go in and knock on the door of the leader and say, hey, fix this problem. So, but for countries which are, let's say, in the middle, so that they're not perfect, but they're trying, to respect human rights, or at least they're sensitive about it. They care about the international community. And for countries which are trying to respect human rights, of which I would say Canada generally is in that group. I mean, things are not perfect in Canada, but Canada doesn't like to be called out as abusing human rights. And if it is, it will try to fix that, even though there's no policeman. When Canada loses a case in the international system, it reacts. It fixes the problem. So for those countries, I think the system is more effective. So
Yeah.
ironically, the countries that need it the most, the system is not effective.
Yes.
For the countries in the middle. So I mean, it's a sort of a little bit of an irony,
Yeah.
perhaps.
It's
Um,
definitely like I guess a body of importance, because then the
absolutely.
international law represents all the countries and all the communities in the world trying to come up with a best scenario solution, right? So it's then you have to take into consideration um, people across the world from you that you might have never met. and you sit around a table and try to determine which kinds of how to give the most human rights possible. Yeah, it's
I mean,
definitely.
my organization, the Center for Law and Democracy, we work internationally to try to get countries to respect human rights.
Yeah.
And I mean, we rely every day on international human rights.
Hmm.
We go and we lobby governments and we work with civil society. Ms. Nassiri also talked about the importance of education. We do a lot of capacity building and awareness raising, and we tell people, civil society groups in a country, hey, here are the human rights guarantees. Here is where your country is in line, and here is where your country is not in line. You need to change those things, and we use that to advocate. And I mean, there are some countries where you just can't get anywhere.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, North Korea, Myanmar. I mean, these are just rogue countries that don't care, and you can't have much impact. But for example, and Syria used to be a country like that. But Syria has changed now, and for example, my organization is talking with some other organizations, and we're going to try to, the laws and human rights system in Syria is very, very weak. It's not in line with international standards, but we hope that there's some space for movement now. So things change,
Definitely. Yeah,
and
and I
this is
hope
a
so.
very, very important body of law.
I think especially with a new generation coming, like this is where the topic that Ms. Nasiri spoke about really comes into light, where we just saw a very interesting case study in Nepal where young people just overthrew the government and just said, we're fed up with
So,
what you're doing. What you're doing is wrong. And we could do a better job by selecting our leaders off of WhatsApp groups. So, if it comes to that point, I guess the biggest uh, factor there was that the youth were educated about what they wanted and they knew how to get it. And at the end of the day, it was very, I'd say, smooth, I guess, in regards to different coups that militaries have done. It was much smoother and less violent.
okay.
So I guess that's also shows how much education is important, just livening up what people want. Because at the end of the day, if the people of a country say we want human rights and we want to be treated humanely, then it kind of twists the arm of the government more than it would if, let's say, the UN says, you got to adhere to these human rights and stop violating them.
Yeah, I mean the people's power, if we can put it like that.
Mhm.
When people really say, okay, enough, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, and they go out into the streets. And I mean, it's certainly the I mean, obviously, military coups are almost always, bad things.
Yeah.
Whereas the People's Revolution in Nepal was different. I mean, there were the latest numbers I saw. There were, I think, around 74 people were killed. So it
Mhm.
wasn't, I mean, there still was loss of life and
Yes,
things.
unfortunately.
Tragic, obviously, but still, it was a remarkable event where basically the young generation said, "Okay, that's enough. We're not going to put up with this." And to me, it's very, very powerful. I think it's a
Mhm.
wonderful thing. We need that.
Sorry. Take it away.
What's that?
Take it away. Please
Yeah,
continue.
yeah, no, and I mean, but I mean, just to say, like for example, going back to Syria, just as an example, I mean, there was a very long, very nasty war in Syria for
Mhm.
for whatever 15, 14 years or something. I don't know the numbers of people that were killed. Many, many thousands, probably hundreds of thousands. So when a brutal regime really digs in its feet,
Yeah.
it can make it difficult. It's not, what happened in Nepal, wasn't possible in Syria.
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of different factors at play in all different kinds of situations, but it's just a good case study
So
that
it's
we've gotten to be able to see recently.
okay. So and just going on. So again, we're in the second part of the presentation, looking at what are the human rights. So and just to we looked at the last slide, we looked at the ones in the Canadian Charter. So now we're going to look at the key rights in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the civil and political ones, self-determination, non-discrimination and gender equality, the right of everyone to recognition as a person before the law. They have emergency derogations, so rules on emergencies. So we don't have that in the Canadian Constitution, for example. Civil and criminal due process rights, again, like the Canadian Constitution, the right to life, the right not to be subject to cruel and unusual punishment or torture. A ban on slavery. Again, we don't have that in the Canadian Constitution, although it's of course understood to be part of the right to life and liberty, right to life, liberty, and security of the person. The same freedoms, religion, expression, freedom of association, assembly, and movement. Also, privacy is explicitly guaranteed in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, not in the Canadian Constitution, although it's been recognized in there. And the prohibition on hate speech, so a ban on hate speech is part of equality. The right to marriage and to a family, the rights of the child, all recognized again, not explicit in the Canadian Constitution. The right to vote and stand for election, like in Canada, and also the right to culture. So slightly similar, but slightly different package of rights. I'll do a couple more slides and then maybe we'll take a little break. We're planning to have a break at some point, right?
Yeah, definitely. So
all right, let me just do a couple of slides and then we'll
just let me know, and then we'll take a quick intermission, and then we'll get back for a lively discussion.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. So just to talk a bit about quality, what I would call quality control issues. Both international law and the Canadian Charter have a clear and established set of values which are human rights. Now, they're not fixed. They do evolve and grow over time, but they're relatively fixed, if I can put it like that. Just because somebody says this is my right doesn't mean that it is. There are rights. It's a real thing. There's an established body of it. It's not what people claim, it's what it is in law. And just to give an amusing example, I was on an Air Canada flight recently, and I was chatting to one of the stewardesses, they were having their dispute with Air Canada about wages and all that kind of stuff. And he said, we were talking about what I do, and I said I'm a human rights lawyer and whatever. And he said, oh yeah, you can help us with our strike and our labor relations. And I said, well, actually, that's not human rights. You're negotiating to get higher wages and to get better benefits and things like that. I mean, it's your right to negotiate, but the issues that you're looking for, like higher wages, for example, that's not a human right. So, I think it's important for people to be accurate when they talk about human rights and to call things human rights when they are and not when they're not. And I think it's particularly important for us as civil society organizations to be responsible, not to say things are rights when they're not, because that basically degrades the notion of human rights. If people just make claims all the time, then other people, the people that we're talking to, the people we're trying to convince, won't take it seriously. So it's, check before you say something is a human right, that it is. If civil society are always making claims about human rights that aren't accurate, I think it will undermine the influence of civil society. We're respected when we make reasonable claims, and we're not respected if we make irresponsible claims. So I think it's important for us, to be clear and precise and, accurate. And of course, if an organization goes around making wild claims about human rights, then that particular organization is not going to be respected and not going to be influential. So I think it's important, before you say something's a right, go and check that it actually is. There's another quality control issue is about the evidence. Something may be a human rights issue, but you still need to prove that there was a violation if you want to, change things. Of course, this can be difficult. And I think, Ms. Nassiri mentioned, for example, the Taliban have destroyed some of the evidence and are trying to hide the evidence and things. So it can be difficult to collect evidence of human rights abuse, even though they're going on. And of course, you want to stop violations, even if you only have a little bit of evidence, if you know that there is a violation going on. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And of course, it depends on what your purpose is. I mean, it's one thing, if you need to go to court, you're going to need a solid, body of evidence. Courts hear evidence. They need evidence. They don't care what you say. I mean, what you say is evidence too, but I mean, they need the evidence to show that there's an abuse before they're going to find an abuse. But if you're just engaging in advocacy, then you might need less evidence. But the whole business of collecting evidence about monitoring and documenting human rights abuse, what we're talking about here, that's a very difficult, complicated issue, but important. First of all, to talk about human rights abuses as they are, like real ones, and also to to try to get as much evidence as you can about them. And it can be quite important. I mean, with digital evidence, because you take a picture on your phone, and then you can manipulate that picture, right? You can change the picture, so you can take a picture and you can stick other people in and whatever. So digital evidence, it's quite important to fix it, to freeze it, so that you can prove that it hasn't been changed, it hasn't been manipulated. For example, to add a timestamp, a location stamp, and there are technical ways, and a device stamp that that picture was taken with this phone and it hasn't left this phone. There are technical ways to do that. I'm not an engineer, but there are programs that can do that. So if you're collecting evidence of human rights abuse, try to get some of those fixing things, so that your pictures, your videos, your recordings, whatever digital evidence you have, gets fixed. Okay, let's stop for a little break now. I still have a few more slides, so we'll come back. I'll talk for about 10 or so more minutes, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
Sounds good. I guess we'll just have short intermission with everyone having their mics and videos off, and then let's say it's right now it's 2:04. At 2:15 we'll reconvene,
Sounds good.
and everyone can get their notepad out. Hey, welcome back, everyone. So we're just waiting on our speakers to make their way back in. In the meantime, just to start off again, this is the sixth panel for Northern Justice Watch on live projects. And we'd like to say thank you again to the Law Foundation of Ontario for funding this seminar. And again, our esteemed speakers are Tahira Nasiri, who gave us a very enlightening and moving speech at the beginning of our seminar. And our keynote speaker is the founder and executive director of the Center for Law and Democracy, Mr. Toby Mendel, who is continuing his slides. And then we will move into a short discussion. And then if you have any questions, we'll take those and call it wraps for our sixth edition of the Live Projects seminar series. So I'll leave the floor again to you, Mr. Mendel, and we're very excited to kind of get into the live discussion part.
Yep, no, for sure. Okay, so just a few more slides here. So who are the key actors that that monitor human rights issues and document human rights violations? And I mean, again, I'm kind of looking at Canada here as an example, and of course, because this is the discussion is to some extent about Canada, but you'll find parallel systems to this in other democracies, of course, not so much in countries that are less democratic. So different actors. I mean, the state and actors, that are part of the government, for example, they and including the legislature have systems for that. We have official oversight bodies. I mentioned already human rights commissions. The Information Commissioner, the Privacy Commissioner. They monitor and document human rights issues in their areas. And then, of course, we have non-official actors. The civil society organizations, academics, religious organizations. I mean, a lot of different, non-official actors engage in this area. Looking first at the state level in Canada. So, for example, within the Senate, there's a standing Senate Committee on Human Rights. So a committee of the Senate that, its whole job is to look at human rights issues, and it issues regular reports on human rights issues. The government has to report to the treaty bodies. So the human rights treaties, they all have the bodies, and I mentioned the Human Rights Committee, for example, and there's the Human Rights Committee under that body. There's the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. These are treaties that Canada has signed. The Committee on the Rights of the Children, Rights of the Child, sorry. So all of those. I'll talk a little bit more about the Human Rights Committee when we look at what NGOs what civil society groups can do. And then I mentioned already the Universal Periodic Review process. So states have to report to the Universal Periodic Review. So each state will prepare its own report on human rights issues for that. And I mentioned here, excuse me, I was very unhappy with the Canadian report to the Universal Periodic Review, which I saw before it was submitted because it was circulated to some human rights groups. And I mean, it basically only talked about equality rights. And now equality rights are very, very important. Certainly don't deny that. But there are other human rights, as we saw from the list of human rights. So I thought it was a little bit biased in favor of just one right. If we look at the official oversight bodies, and I already mentioned these, the Canadian Human Rights Commission basically just deals with discrimination. That's the one issue it deals with. The Information Commissioner deals with access to information as a human right, and the Privacy Commissioner obviously deals with privacy. So those are the three main oversight bodies. Of course, some other bodies deal with other rights-related issues as well. And they issue a number of different kinds of reports on human rights issues. Each of them issues an annual report. So each year, they're kind of their big report that what they've done for the year and the key human rights issues that they're focusing on. They can issue special reports. So, if there's a special kind of issue or concern, so the annual report will look at the whole area that they're focused on. So, for example, for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, discrimination and challenges with equality in Canada as a whole. But it might, for example, do a special report on discrimination against a particular group, for example, and focus just on that. And then they also issue case reports. So each of these bodies, you can bring individual cases to them. So, for example, if you feel that you've been subject to a discrimination in the federal system, and there are human rights commissions in every province and territory of Canada as well. So if you feel that you've been the subject of discrimination in one way or another, you can go to these bodies and present your claim and say, this is what happened. This is discriminatory. Please act on it. And they will deal with that, and they will issue a case report, and they will also address the issue. So, for example, if you've been discriminated against in employment, they will, take measures against that employer not to do that again, or perhaps to, redress the wrong in your own case. So, moving now to civil society reporting, which I think probably is quite a lot of interest to some of our viewers. And I would say that broadly speaking, we can talk of three areas that CSOs, or three main areas in which CSOs report. Firstly, they may report to national official bodies. Secondly, to international bodies. And third, they can just do their own reporting that's not to anybody, that's kind of to the world. And I will just mention here, of course, civil society groups in Canada can report to Canadian official actors about human rights violations in Canada. That's one area. That's what they're primarily focusing on. But they can also, especially to Global Affairs Canada, they can report to Canada about violations that are taking place in other countries. So Ms. Nassiri talked about violations that are taking place in Afghanistan. She might wish to, put some information about those violations on the radar screen of the Global Affairs Canada, and then Canada can use that in its own interactions, for example, with Afghanistan. It can raise concerns directly with the government of Afghanistan through diplomatic channels, and it also, Canada engages in the international processes. And for example, if you look at the UPR process, which I've mentioned a few times, the Universal Periodic Review. So basically, the Human Rights Council is the top UN body that deals with human rights, and it oversees the UPR process. And what happens in the UPR is every country can put recommendations to the country that's being reviewed, and every country goes through that cycle. So for example, when Afghanistan comes up for review, Canada can say, we would recommend that Afghanistan take measures to stop discriminating against women, to stop discriminating against Hazaras, and they can recommend specific things that should be done in that area. For example, open up high schools for women, which are basically being closed down in Afghanistan, or whatever. And CSOs can have quite a lot of influence on those recommendations, because Canada, through the UPR process, has to deal with every country in the world. They're not expert on all of those things, and if a civil society group or even an individual like you, Ms. Nassiri, goes to Canada and says, okay, Afghanistan's coming up for the UPR. Here are the priority issues that we see. We would like you as Canada to raise those. Then the Canadians will be listening to that. So CSOs can influence not only human rights in Canadian CSOs, not only in Canada, but also internationally. And my organization does quite a bit of that. And we can talk more about that, how that works later on if people are interested. So if we look at national official bodies now talking about human rights in Canada, often these, there may be ongoing consultations around a human rights issue. For example, Treasury Board Secretariat, which is one of the ministries at the federal level, they're currently reviewing the Access to Information Act. So one of the issues my organization works on a lot is access to information. So we will provide a submission as part of that, and we will say, here are the problems with the act. Here's what's not working. Here's what's working. Here's how, in practice it's not working or whatever. So there are formal consultations with civil society, with the Canadian public as a whole, and CSOs can report as part of that. CSOs can also feed into the annual and special reporting of these bodies. So, for example, if the Human Rights Commission was preparing a special report on discrimination of minority groups within Canada, and you're one of those minority groups, you might want to present some information to them, so they can integrate it into their report. And then, as I mentioned, you can lodge and support individual cases. For example, I already mentioned discrimination before the Canadian Human Rights Commission. So when it comes to the international level, usually the international bodies have very, very specific rules about making submissions. And those rules talk about the timeline for submissions, the length, how many words or pages, excuse me, what subjects you can cover in your submissions. They're very precise. They don't want a lot of extraneous information. They want to focus on the issue that they're looking at. And just to mention some of the key opportunities for engagement. So UPR process, mentioned it several times already. It's supposed to take place every 4.5 years for every country. So there's a cycle. And if you can go onto the website and look at any country and find out when that country is coming up. And Canada was last reviewed in 2023, so fairly recently. So its next review will be in about 5 years in 2028. I don't know the exact schedule for that. And CSOs can submit parallel reports on the human rights issues that they consider of concern in relation to that country. And those parallel reports are made available to everyone, to the UN members, and any country can look at them. So, for example, we made a submission to the 23, and probably usually the CSO submission deadline's like about a year before. So you have to look on the website when the deadline. If you're late, they won't take it. So, and you can talk about any human rights issue you want. That is an absolutely open. The UPR Universal Periodic Review, it covers all of the human rights that are guaranteed in the international system. So, as I already mentioned, a key part of this is, states make recommendations. Other states make recommendations to the state that's being reviewed. So in a sense, what you really want to target is that the recommendations coming from the other states are good recommendations, are recommendations about the issues that you feel are of concern to you. So, and if you may want to, engage with certain states which you think may be more likely to. So, for example, just using Afghanistan as an example, you might say, okay, Sweden. I'm just pulling this out of a hat. I don't know, but you might say Sweden's very, active on women's rights in Afghanistan. So I'm going to make sure that my report on that issue goes to the Swedish authorities because I want them to raise this issue. So there's a whole business about how to increase the influence of your reporting. Another one is the Human Rights Committee process. So this one is coming up now for Canada. Canada will be reviewed, and every country which is part of the ICCPR, so the 173 countries, are regularly reviewed about every 5 years. And the scope of that is the rights that are guaranteed by the ICCPR. So you have to talk about those rights. And what they do as part of this process is they start by having a list of issues for the country. So you can make a submission about what you think the key issues are. That's the first round. And the deadline in the case of Canada, if you want to make a submission on Canada, is the 5th of January. So you can say, okay, I think these are the key human rights concerns in Canada, women's equality, whatever you think is important. So my organization is going to do that. We're going to focus on freedom of expression because that's the area that we mostly focus on. And we're going to list, some of the weaknesses in Canada's protection of freedom of expression. And we're going to try to get that on the list of issues. Then the list of issues is agreed by the Human Rights Committee. That's published. So you can see, okay, here are the issues. Canada has to report on those issues to the committee. They have to say, okay, in relationship to each issue that's on the list, what Canada has done, and this is the same for every country, of course. And then CSOs can say, okay, so if we're successful in getting freedom of expression onto the list of issues, then we will provide a full submission on the substance of those issues, and the deadline for that is the 2nd of February. Sorry, I say 2025 is 2026, not 2025. So obviously that would have been last year. So and then in the end of it, the Human Rights Committee adopts concluding observations. They prepare a whole report and they say, okay, Canada's doing well on this and not so well on this, and here's what we expect Canada to do and whatever, and they do that for every country. So that's quite an important process. So you can see here, going back, Kazim, you sort of said, how impactful are these systems on different countries? Countries that don't care. They get a report, and the report says you're struggling, you've got a lot of problems on human rights, you need to fix a lot of things, and the country says, whatever, I don't care, because but Canada will certainly, this report, civil society groups in Canada, politicians in Canada will use it, and so people it gives us leverage, and we can say, look, Canada, the Human Rights Committee says you're not doing well on this issue. What are you going to do about it? And we will advocate, and Canada will take it seriously, and we'll try to fix the problems. So this really shows, you can see the difference between different countries.
And that's always something that I've really enjoyed about these panels and your speeches is they always end up with a very practical method of actually getting the job done. Because otherwise, sometimes human rights and reporting human rights may seem like a very high profile job, and it's like people might see it as not being individual, and you have to have a very large organization behind you. But these panels are very clear to show that, like, if you feel truly strongly about something and you want your voice to be heard, there are avenues. And I always like having practical methods after every presentation. Otherwise, it's just a thought bubble in there.
Theoretical.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
No, I mean, I run a civil society organization. Our mantra is change. We want things to happen. We don't just talk about things. We want things to change. We're working for change. Human rights change, obviously.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, there some countries which have signed the first optional protocol to the ICCPR, you can bring individual cases at the international level. So Ms. Nassiri talked about how there are no international cases against Afghanistan. Afghanistan has not signed this optional protocol, so you can't bring a case. The country has to accept that. Canada has accepted it, and there have been a lot of cases against Canada at the UN Human Rights Committee, and Canada has lost quite a few of those cases as well. So, there's some quite important cases against Canada where Canada's lost, and when Canada loses the case, it fixes the problem, like it addresses that. So, and there are 119 states parties, so a lot of countries, but of course not a lot of countries are not states parties. I mean, first of all, obviously, you can only take a case based on a right that's guaranteed by the ICCPR. So the kind of the rights that I talk about, freedom of expression, but equality, gender equality, those are all rights that are guaranteed by the ICCPR. Secondly, you need to exhaust domestic remedies. You can't just jump there. You need to go through the national system first. Normally, that means you go through the whole court system in the country. So for Canada, you would have to go to the appeal court and then, apply to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court rejected the case, then, then you can go to the Human Rights Committee. So, but you don't need to go through all of that if there's no realistic possibility of success. If, for example, in the country the courts are not independent, if the courts have already decided against that issue on another case, if for one reason or another there's no point, they're not going to make you go through the courts just to waste time. But in a country like Canada, you will certainly have to go through the courts. But in, for example, Afghanistan, they may accept a case directly because they can see that it's not going to, you don't have any chance in Afghanistan of fixing the problem. It's a contentious case. It's like a case, you as an individual against the country, and each party makes submissions and replies and whatever. It does take a very long time. So we have a case, my organization has a case currently against Germany. And that case has been about 6 years in the works. And we're hoping for a decision, soon. I mean, you don't know until the decision comes. They don't tell you it's coming; it just comes. But so it takes a while. But of course, when you win a case like that, it's a big deal. So that's and that one. I mean, making a submission. Kazim, you said that ordinary people can do it. Making a submission, really anyone can do it. Anyone can take a case too.
Yeah.
There's no, you don't have to be a lawyer. There's no formal requirements. But of course, you need to be responsible about that. You should only take a case if you can prepare a good case.
There's definitely a fine line to follow.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said, Canada is a country. There's 119 states parties. You can find the list. If you're looking for any country, there's a website online that you can see the different, which country. It's the first optional protocol to the ICCPR. That's the one. When it comes to non-official, so I've talked first about reporting in Canada, secondly about reporting at the international level, and then thirdly, just reporting not to anybody. And of course, civil society organizations are always continuously publishing reports about human rights issues, including violations and things. And they may report on a particular case, so an individual case of abuse, or on a particular theme. So Ms. Nassiri was talking about discrimination against Hazaras and women in Afghanistan. They might write a report about that, or a report on a country, or whatever. I mean, civil society organizations are publishing thousands of reports all the time. Civil society organizations might also not publish a report, but just maintain a database of violations, which may either be a public database like online, or just for their own internal use. A lot of organizations do that. And they may, contribute work or information, or evidence to the work of other civil society organizations. So, for example, you may not be able to publish a report on something, but another organization is publishing a report, so you can contribute your information to them. So there's a lot of, it's essentially an unlimited, whatever CSOs want to do, they can do. It's free space. Of course, as we just discussed, Kazim, the CSOs want to change things. They don't, we're not academics. We don't publish reports simply to make interesting points. We publish reports to try to change, get action to change. So, for example, you may publish a report so as to contribute to an advocacy campaign, or to try to get official actors to change their behavior, to stop discriminating, to change a law, whatever it is. You may just want to raise public awareness. So, Ms. Nassiri talked about the importance of public being aware of these things. And if you understand that your rights are being violated, that's already a form of empowerment. So that's an important area. You may want to try to collaborate or build a collaboration with other civil society groups, so that there's more of you that are fighting for the same thing. Or you may want to bring it to the attention of official actors who can take action on it. For example, you might complain to the police about a certain form of abuse, or complain to the official oversight body. So, that's a very, very open space. basically civil society, whatever they can think of, they can do. But these are the kind of the main things that they'll do. Just the final comments. I hope that I've addressed, some of these. This is a really large issue. Of course,
Definitely.
I'm happy to take questions. My details are here. I think we can share these slides with the participants. So if people want to get in touch with me later on, this is my email. Please feel free to email me about anything that we discussed here. So I will stop with that. And if you have some questions, Kazim, or if maybe some of the audience do.
Perfect. Yes, definitely. So again, I'm trying to just wrap my head around the whole subject. Obviously, it's a large topic, and maybe we probably need a couple more panels to actually get it down in terms of really understanding it. But some of the things that stood out to me was always like this contrast of actually being able to do something and the difficulty of actually doing something. So yes, even as an individual, you are motivated and you are allowed and you can do something in terms of writing a report or putting in a violation report or something like that. But on the other hand, like you said, in order to be able to do it properly, first you have to go through some steps on actually determining whether or not it's a human right, making sure it's something that you need to advocate for, and being able to actually know that you're putting in the proper work for the report itself. So for an individual, at the end of the day, can we just say that it's better to be a part of something rather than try to go the road alone?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Obviously, I mean, you can, if as an individual you're facing yourself or you're aware of serious human rights abuses, probably somebody else is already aware of it and working on it and thinking about it. For example, Ms. Nassiri talked about, discrimination against women in Afghanistan. There's a lot of international organizations that that are working on that issue. You're not alone on those kinds of things. So, I mean, I think, but of course, it's always good to work with them. And I would say that, I mean, a lot of civil society organizations, even very large ones, like Human Rights Watch, for example, in the United States, or Amnesty International in England, and we have a branch in Canada as well. I mean, they're very large organizations, but they're always hungry for good evidence. For concrete, properly documented information about human rights abuses. So, both of those organizations, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, they both have, Afghanistan desks, people that are, specifically working on Afghanistan. And if you have, I mean, I'm just using Afghanistan as an example because we have a speaker who talked about that. But, if you have information is well documented that shows human rights abuses, I think they'll always be happy to get it.
Yeah.
So it's certainly better to work with other groups, and then there probably are groups that you can find to work with.
Definitely. And just in terms of like actual change and making an effort, I do have a question for Ms. Nassiri in regards to sometimes in the West, we take on issues and we try to advocate for them. But it's very difficult to make a change in the actual geographic region where we want these changes to happen. Especially like we use social media, we tweet about it, but people in the actual area, they don't hear about it because their freedom of expression has been limited or their education has been limited. So as in terms of your advocacy, have you been able to find a way around that, actually reaching people that you're advocating for? And is there anything you would suggest to the audience that's interested in trying to help your cause to further it?
In my idea, especially for Afghanistan, especially who are want to speak up for their rights, so it's pretty hard for them to hear for their government. Especially, it is no matter which government, it is which regime. So it is hard because as a marginalized community, if I were in Afghanistan, I have my own experience when we were talking about rights, about education, and we always silenced by government, by people who doesn't believe to right. So I think in my idea, it's good that we have other people with us to stand beside us, and also hear our voice, and also we can speak up too if our voice became silenced. So we have to speak out through media, different platform of social media even, and so we can ask about the people outside or inside of the country to become with us and also hear our voice. So in my idea, I think so we can ask the people who are believe in democracy, in uh, liberty, freedom, or human rights. So we can make our voice stronger with that people, and we can remove the obstacles from us like that. Actually, it is my idea. So I don't know if the other guests have any idea about this or not. So
Yeah.
I just
No, of course. Yeah. Again, I just want to remind everyone who's listening, if they have any questions, please let us know. Our speakers are very informed about their topics, so they would be more than pleased to answer. And on what you said, it's definitely a very interesting topic, like getting your voice heard. I recently read a bit about how they flew thousands of lanterns into North Korea from South Korea with pamphlets in them, just so that like maybe one could pop and then a pamphlet could fall into the hands of a North Korean, and they can see how much misinformation that they're actually being subjected to, and there's a whole different world outside of what they're being forced into. So that kind of always intrigues me, because sometimes from the list of human rights that are guaranteed by various international conventions that Toby shared with us, it really got me thinking about how much we take for granted here in Canada, especially. Like, we have so many things here that we see as a right that other people might never experience in their whole life because it's not seen as a right there. And it also got me thinking, especially with this reporting, that we need to hang on to it and make sure that we never lose it. And we got to keep everyone in line as the people, to kind of make sure that we don't lose this sense of human rights in our country as well, and to also never take it for granted and make sure everyone in the world has access to the same human rights one day. Hopefully, it sounds utopic, but I think that we'll get there, like sometime, somehow.
Well, hopefully. I mean, a couple of comments. I mean, first of all, I absolutely agree with what you said. Sometimes Canadians can be a little bit, complacent. Oh, everything's fine here. We don't need to worry about it and whatever. And I mean, of course, we are very lucky to be in Canada. Things are relatively good here, but, we need to keep fighting, not only to keep things good, but to make things better, because there are some things that aren't good enough in Canada. So I think it's important, it's important always to keep fighting for those things. I tell a funny story. So we used to live in London, England, and we moved back to Halifax in Canada in 2002. So London is a very big city. It's a very cramped city. London grew, to however many millions it is today. It wasn't designed like that, right? Hundreds of years ago, it was designed for horses and carriages, whatever. So the traffic in London is pretty serious. When we moved back to Halifax, there was a whole campaign in the newspaper the week that we got there about the traffic and how terrible the traffic was and what. And I mean, my wife and I, we were kind of looking at each other, laughing and thinking,
Yeah.
people talking about they don't even know what traffic is. But I realized like it's important to complain about things and to fight to make things better, even though the traffic in Halifax is nothing compared to the traffic in London, but we don't want it to be. So you need to fight now to kind of keep things good and whatever. So I mean I really think that that's absolutely a valid point. So Canadians, don't be complacent. We need to fight too, and I mean, I don't want to be political, but look, we can look down to the south of us, where we're seeing, a very serious attack on democracy and human rights inside of that country. The people of that country are having their own rights threatened. It's not just, everybody's talking about the impact on other countries, but the biggest impact is inside the United States. So, they now need to stand up and fight. So we need to be vigilant.
Yes, definitely. And I think like the fundamental idea under human rights is the fact that as a as the human race, we have a serious potential to do good. But the only way that we can achieve that good is if we're all on the same level and we all have human rights to actually work with. So if we don't have that and if we're missing it, then who knows what kinds of brains we're missing out on in Afghanistan because the girls aren't being educated. Who knows what kind of developments we're missing out on because the Hazara community in Afghanistan or North Korea is completely being discriminated and subjugated. So that also kind of enlightens you in terms of why human rights is important because it's for the human race in general. We have a question here. So Mr. Sherifydin, who is also our organization's executive director. He says, hi, Toby, Tahara, and Kazim. Thanks a lot for this great webinar. As you know, today is the International Day of the Girl Child. Let me ask a question on their behalf. Many girls, including Hazara girls, still struggle for their right to education. Sometimes victims don't have proof, only their word and experience. How can ordinary people, especially girls, make sure their stories are taken seriously when they speak up about human rights abuses? So yeah, like this is a huge issue. We recently, not too long ago, Malala Yousafzai came out with this very same issue, and she paid a very heavy price for it just to get her voice heard. So how can how can we speak up for them and then make sure that we have them on our sides so that their voices are heard? I'd like to first direct the question to Ms. Nasiri, and then I'd like to hear what you have to say about that as well, Mr. Mandel.
I think it is too hard to say for Afghan girls, especially for Hazara girls. So in Afghanistan, unfortunately, they are denied even for forbidding their voices, so their faces. So if they keep their stories from discrimination, and also if they speak out for their rights, so I think it is hard. Even the international communities like uh, several human rights organizations, they hear from Afghan girls because they are denied from basic rights. So, and I think so. Um, we have to hear, we have to explore about them, and also we have to we have to encourage them to come to several platform and speak up about their education, about their decrease that misogynistic deprive them from their basic rights. So I think it is our responsibilities, not just me as a Hazara woman or as Afghan human rights. So it is the responsibilities of the people who are believed to fight for equality, fight for democracy, fight for human rights. So we have to make stronger voices, and we have to share their stories in our social platform, and also we have to help them and guide them to how they can make their voice louder, to hear from like ICC or SEDA or something, that some other organization that they are. I think they can help to I don't know what should I say about this. So this is necessary to help them. I think it would be effective for Afghan girls, for Hazara girls, that they are denied from education and basic rights.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes both ways, because in the West, until we learn about the issue, it's difficult for us to raise our voices. But once we hear about brave girls that come out and speak against the atrocities, we try to make an effort, at least, to kind of help them. But that courage is, like you said, definitely very important. And it's also a very important role on us to give them the courage to be able to speak up. I grew up with the examples of how Iqbal Masih inspired a Canadian activist named Craig Kielburger. He was inspired by the message of Iqbal Masih, who was a child laborer in rug carpet factories, and he was shot for speaking out. Again, just recently, like I said, we have a very prominent activist like Malala, and I think it's just a very, I guess, good circle where they show courage, and then we show the courage to stand behind them. But what do you think about that, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, just a few observations. Firstly, I mean, as I said before, I think we have to understand in this conversation that Afghanistan is one of the least democratic, most human rights abusive countries in the world. So it's. I mean, we're talking about a really hard case here.
Yeah.
Of course, the people of Afghanistan deserve their human rights just like everyone else. Human rights are universal; it's for everyone. But I mean, it is, so we should, I think it's important to keep that in mind. That's not a normal country. That's a crazy country. I don't know any country in the world which denies girls to go to school.
Yeah.
That's just nuts, I mean, I think everybody can
and does it on an official basis.
yeah,
not like a social norm, but actually like
right. It's official policy. It's not hidden at all. So I mean, I think that the point about that, for me, like that particular abuse of equality for women in Afghanistan is very well known. It's not hidden at all. I'm sure there are, not that I'm sure, of course, there are a lot of other forms of abuse that are going on that are more hidden, less obvious, and perhaps even more serious. And, the things that I won't even start to talk about because it will upset people. But I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things going on that we don't know about. But the problem with that is that the Taliban just don't care. I mean, they are not, they're not susceptible to international public pressure to change that. And as I said, I mean, I believe it's the only country in the world which has a policy like that, and yet they're still, sticking to it, even though it's not only, I mean, it's wildly discriminatory, but it's also destructive for the country because half of their people are not getting educated. No country can go forward with only half of its people. So I mean, it's just ridiculous. I think, but I will make another slightly more optimistic point, and I don't know if I'm sure Ms. Nassiri is aware of this, but the Taliban cut off the internet in Afghanistan for a couple of days recently, on I think the 30th of September and the 1st of October, something like that. And so, I mean, totally cut it off, no internet in and out. And I mean, everything stopped. The flights couldn't land. I mean, so even they can't do that. They had to open it up again. And, the internet is an enormously powerful tool. If women in Afghanistan, I mean, of course, they need access to the internet. They need some basic equipment, like a smartphone, basically, that they can record stories and things. But it is possible to get messages out. And I mean, Malali and some of these other people suffered great harm from speaking out, but it's possible to do that in a more anonymous, more quiet way, but still get your message out. So, I mean, I think that the modern communications environment is an ally of ours, even though there's a lot of bad stuff online, but still the people that are speaking truth and that are telling true stories and want to expose abuses have more power to do that. And there's only a few countries in the world which are able to control the internet, and Afghanistan is not one of those. It can't do that. China, for example, does that. But so I mean, I think that the options for voice are much greater today, even in highly repressive environments. But for me, the problem with Afghanistan is not sort of. I mean, of course, there's some issue about that we don't know what's going on, but the bigger problem is we can't change it, even if we do know what's going on, because they just
Yeah. So there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully, we are at the end of the time.
You have one question there, maybe?
Allotted for today. I don't. Oh, no, I don't see another question here.
Tahira has come on the. I don't know if you can see her on your screen. Tahira has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay. 1 second. I don't know. Please
Hi,
go.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Mendel, for a very nice presentation, and I really enjoy it. I have one particular question on the universality of the human rights. As we know, we are in a kind of very hard situation that a lot of time these human rights at the international level was kind of leveraged or because of the national interests of many other countries. In particular, a lot of Western countries who were actually defending human rights, and many people in the developing country, at least, they were looking at the model to the West that they are advocate of the human rights. And then when they talk about human rights, they really mean human rights. But now we see a lot of political influences, and then there is a lot of doubt in the long term. We don't know to what extent that this universality of human rights would be kept intact, and then will be preserved with the current situation, and how much yourself are you optimistic about the situation right now? Because as you can see, as human rights is everything is good when you are everything at home is perfectly fine, then you are happy to advocate for international human rights and so on. But when things become difficult at home, then a lot of people, they are not compromising. They said, okay, we give the priority to our country. One example, like in Afghanistan, for example, the international community just pulled over, although they knew that the Taliban policy is not changed, and then they will violate the human rights. The second thing we can see in Syria is, again, the people who are committed, very nasty, human rights violations now, and they were on a list. Now they are welcome at UN and anywhere, and there is not a problem at all. And what is your opinion? What do you see the future? Either this human rights, which we've been actually advocating for the last, since Second World War, is gonna something stays, or we are going to the direction of the country like China or any other country that said, okay, the national interest is the priority rather than universality of the human rights. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a
Good
tough
question.
I mean, look, I think that we have to you know, serious people have to recognize that we're in a bad moment at the moment. You know, things are worse today than they have been for a very long time. You know, that's you know, anyone that doesn't recognize that, it somehow always have their head in the ground, you know. That's a reality, and we can see, you know, some countries which we had, you know, essentially counted on as being very important parts of the system of support for human rights, no longer playing that role. And so, I mean, you know, this is a reality, and we also see, you know, you mentioned like China. We can see that China, for example, has become much more over the last 10, 15 years, has become much more aggressive about exporting non-democratic values. So, you know, before, if we go back 15 years ago, I mean, China was never a democracy, but, you know, it was content just to be undemocratic inside of itself and not bother, you know, to push that outside. But in the last 15 years, they've started, you know, doing that much more aggressively. For example, they bring journalists to China from all over the world, especially from Africa, and train them in non-democratic journalism values. You know, so I mean, that's a very active and aggressive program. So things are bad. But you know, I mean, Gazim talked about the human race, and you know, I mean, I think individual people, you know, not everyone, and of course some leaders are not respecting human rights and don't care about those things, but I think most people ultimately do, and you know, we need to you know, find a way to build on our solidarity, build on our core human values, because human rights are basically human values. They're not strange things that were invented in the UN. They're basically, you know, this idea of equality. I don't think anyone, you know, can fail to feel that they should have benefit from equality. It's just a basic thing. I'm a person just like you. You know, whatever you have, I should have it too. It's very basic thing in a way. So, you know, and I mean, you know, freedom of speech. I want to say something. You know, whatever. These are, even though legally they can be quite complicated, but the core values behind them, I think, are just basic human values, and we all share them. So we need to, you know, we need to find more solidarity and more ways to fight back. You asked if I'm optimistic. I mean, I do think things are challenging now. I'm generally by nature, I am an optimist. Like, if you know, just in my life, I'm usually optimistic about things. I'm feeling a less optimistic today than I did 5 years ago, let's say, and 5 years before that too. But I still do have that hope and belief that you know, we will maintain the universality of human rights. We will, you know, continue to fight for them and continue to spread human rights around the world. But of course, a lot of challenges. So
Yeah,
half and half.
definitely. Yeah, it's a hard topic, very interesting question. And like you said, sometimes people have to remember the world's gotten so complicated nowadays that we can't remember how we got here. But the fact that right now we have human rights is after a very long struggle of a very large group of dedicated people who said, you know what, in order to actually live, we need human rights. So let's get this, let's make this happen. But unfortunately, because the world's gotten so complicated, it seems like some people have forgotten how we got here in the first place. So I just want to direct the same question to Ms. Nassiri, and then after that, we are at 3:07. We will end our panel on that note. And Ms. Nassiri, the floor is yours. If you want, I can try to re-summarize the question.
Yeah, I didn't get the point. Which question? Sorry.
The question Ms. here is asking is, with everything we've seen so far, it's good and well that countries try and promote human rights when their domestic issues are good, but when things at home get bad and economically or politically, Western countries start struggling, they tend to step away from human rights endorsements and promoting human rights across the world. And he's just asking how you see the current situation across the world, and how Western countries are seeming to be pulling back more and more from promoting human rights in the world?
In this kind of situation, I think it is too hard to respond this question. I would say about this question, so we have to support the voice of that they speak up for justice, for equality, for democracy, and they want justice, and they want to tell their story about discrimination, about fight, about violation that they faced with that. Especially, I would like to say about the people of Afghanistan, especially women, that they are faced with lots of challenges in Afghanistan, and even as our guest mentioned that before. So even they didn't access in the internet, their voices forbidden, their faces also so forbidden. It is hard to say that this response. So I just like to say in this case, so we can support their voices. So we can share via different platforms like social platform, other platforms that we had access to, and we can ask international communities like ICC, other communities that they can help in this case. And so I just can say about this question, these matters. So I didn't have anything special. So I think we can we can support their voices, and we can move together. So I think it is effective for everyone entire the world, that most people face with challenges, with discrimination, with prejudice, and like this. So I just hope this.
Definitely. Yeah, human rights for all. That's the message. On behalf of Northern Justice Watch, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in today's panel. Again, a big thank you to the Law Foundation of Ontario for funding us. A huge welcome and thank you to Ms. Nassiri. Hopefully we'll have her as a guest speaker more and more. And again, where would we be, Mr. Mendel, without your thought-provoking presentations? For anyone who wants the slides from his presentations, please reach out to him directly, or you can also reach out to us at Northern Justice Watch, and we'll procure it and pass it along. And that's it for our panel today. I hope everyone is stepping away from the screen having learned something new. I know I have. And it was a very enlightening conversation. I'd like to thank both speakers, and I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving weekend, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.